Okay, so you know how everyone has been totally obsessed with Tom Bower? He's basically like the royal family's attack dog when it comes to writing books. He writes these super interesting and often really harsh biographies about powerful people. He's definitely not known for holding back or being gentle, right? But for a really long time, he was strangely quiet about Meghan Markle. And that silence? It was deafening, especially when you think about all the crazy stuff that was going on around the royal family. I mean, seriously think about it for a second. You had the whole Prince Andrew scandal blowing up all over the news. Harry and Meghan were doing their own thing and really stirring up trouble with that famous Oprah interview. And the palace? They were just staying completely quiet and shutting down. It felt like they were always playing catch-up, always reacting too late. And Tom Bower, this guy who normally jumps at any chance to throw more fuel on the fire, he was just sitting back and watching everything unfold. That's what really got me thinking about this whole situation. Here's the thing you need to understand. Tom Bower is not just some regular gossip columnist writing trash. He's extremely careful and meticulous about his work. He digs really deep into stories, documents absolutely everything he finds, and then he waits for the perfect moment. He doesn't just react to the first rumors that pop up. Instead, he watches what happens afterward, the fallout. Who's denying what claims? Who's suddenly changing their behavior? Who's staying completely and totally silent? Like, he sees all those reactions, or the lack of reactions, as actual evidence. He's actively looking for patterns and repeated behaviors, not just random, isolated incidents that happen once. And that's exactly why his silence about Meghan was so incredibly significant and meaningful. He was gathering data and information, carefully observing the entire landscape, and waiting patiently for exactly the right moment to strike and speak up. It's like he was basically saying to everyone, I'm not going to get all caught up in the whole he said, she said drama. I'm going to sit back and watch how everyone reacts to these situations, and that reaction pattern will tell me the real story that's happening behind the scenes. And honestly, that's a pretty smart and clever way to approach this whole situation. Because let's face it and be real here. The royal family is like a masterclass in using strategic silence as a weapon. The palace staff and advisors are highly trained to react proportionally and carefully to situations. If something actually threatens the real monarchy and its existence, they'll address it head-on immediately and directly. But if it's just reputational damage or pure speculation and rumors, they very often just completely ignore it, hoping that it'll eventually blow over and disappear. And that creates a recognizable pattern, right? They're basically showing you through their actions what they really care about and what actually matters to them. And that's exactly what Tom Bower was focusing his attention on. He wasn't focusing on the individual accusations being thrown at Meghan. Instead, he was watching her constant presence around these pressure points. These critical moments where the royal institution had to stop and recalibrate how they were handling things. He wasn't necessarily directly saying that she personally caused these problems to happen, but she was consistently there every single time, and that proximity and closeness matters a lot. He understood something really clever. If he just came out immediately swinging with direct accusations, the palace would instantly go into full defense mode and shut everything down. But by staying completely quiet and silent, he let the environment and situation speak for itself. He let the palace's reactions, or their lack of reactions, reveal their own real priorities and what they actually cared about. And honestly, that's way more damaging and effective than any single accusation could ever be. Think about it carefully. When the palace did choose to respond to certain specific claims, it showed everyone exactly what they considered to be truly dangerous and threatening. And when they deliberately stayed silent on other claims, that silence spoke volumes and said so much. It's like they were basically saying, okay, this particular issue we absolutely need to shut down immediately. But this other thing, we can afford to just ignore it completely. And that creates a clear hierarchy of concern, a visible pattern that Tom Bower could then carefully analyze and study. The absolute genius of his approach is that he wasn't even trying to prove anything specific was true or false. He was trying to explain why these claims and rumors persisted and continued, and why they just wouldn't go away even without any concrete hard evidence backing them up. And his answer and explanation was really interesting. It wasn't actually about the truth of the claims themselves. It was about how the power structures and institutions responded to those claims. He waited patiently until there was enough accumulated behavior and repeated patterns to make his point convincingly without having to make any brand new allegations or accusations. He was basically saying to everyone, "Look, I'm not sitting here saying she's guilty of anything specific. What I am saying is that her presence has consistently triggered these institutional shifts and changes in how they operate. And that pattern itself is the real story here." And that's a much more nuanced, subtle, and frankly, way more effective argument to make. So by the time Tom Bauer actually opened his mouth and started talking publicly, the whole landscape and environment had completely shifted. People were already looking suspiciously and side-eyeing the royal family's official narratives and stories. The Sussexes' relationship with the media was completely in the toilet and destroyed, and the palace's usual standard no-comment response was now being read and interpreted as actively shady and suspicious, not just passively aloof and distant like before. In that changed environment, even a measured and careful take like Tom Bauer's carried a massive ton of weight and influence. He wasn't dropping huge bombshells or naming specific names, but he was talking about the system itself and how it operates. He was talking about access and control, about how institutions decide when to step in and intervene versus when to let things just play out naturally. He was saying that even just being near the fire, even if you definitely didn't start it yourself, can fundamentally change how people react to you and how institutions behave around you. And that totally and completely reframed the entire conversation, right? Instead of endlessly arguing over whether Meghan was secretly plotting to overthrow the monarchy, people started asking completely different questions. Why are they responding this specific way? Why are some people getting shielded and protected while others are being thrown to the wolves? Why does silence look strategic and planned in some cases, but just plain dismissive and rude in other cases? That's where things got really real and serious. Tom Bauer's restraint and patience actually made him way more credible and believable. He wasn't ranting and raving like a crazy person. He was contextualizing and explaining stuff that had already happened in the public eye. He wasn't demanding that everyone agree with him, but he was forcing everyone to reconsider and rethink what they thought they already knew for sure. And for the palace, that was a serious problem they had to deal with. If they chose to respond to Tom Bauer directly, they'd be giving his framing and interpretation legitimacy and importance. But if they just ignored him completely, they'd be letting his narrative take root and spread without any opposition. Historically, they almost always go with the ignore it and hope it goes away strategy. Silence is their shield and protection. It absorbs the commentary and criticism without giving it any official power or acknowledgement. But for Harry and Meghan personally, this was way more personal and emotional. Tom Bauer wasn't directly accusing them of anything specific or concrete, but he was strongly implying that their presence and involvement was causing serious institutional stress and pressure. And that's a really tough implication to argue against because it's not about what they actually did or didn't do. It's about what happened around them and near them. It's about observation and patterns, not direct accusation. By the end of this whole situation, it was crystal clear that Tom Bauer's silence wasn't because he was unsure or didn't know what to say. It was because he was carefully prepping the battlefield and setting everything up. He let the events create their own record in history, and when he finally spoke up, he didn't need to prove anything new. The environment and situation had already done all the heavy lifting for him. He didn't do some big dramatic press conference or leak a bunch of secret documents to the media. He just talked calmly about the atmosphere that had built up around these controversies and explained clearly why certain stories just wouldn't die no matter what. He wasn't trying to prove guilt or innocence of any specific person. He was trying to explain why the institutions behaved the way they did and continue to do, and he drew a clear line in the sand between direct accusation and providing context. He openly acknowledged that a lot of the stuff flying around online was completely unproven and even irresponsible and reckless. But he said that just dismissing it all completely missed the entire point. The real question that matters was, why did the palace react so selectively? Why were some stories shut down immediately while others were allowed to fester and grow? According to Tom Bauer's analysis, These reactions and responses aren't random or accidental at all. The royal machine and system is specifically designed to assess risk, not fairness or justice. If a story threatens the crown and the monarchy itself, they'll deal with it immediately. If it's just a PR problem without any legal teeth or consequences, they'll very often just ignore it completely. And that pattern of behavior creates a signal and message. Silence becomes a signal even when they don't consciously mean for it to be one. That's where Meghan comes back into the picture and story. Tom Bower wasn't saying that she was personally masterminding some grand conspiracy or evil plan. He was just pointing out and highlighting that she was always there, always present, at these specific moments when the palace was changing its public stance, when they were being extra cautious behind the scenes and in private. From Tom Bower's point of view and perspective, that repetition and pattern changed how the institution behaved regardless of her actual intentions or what she meant to do. And that's a huge and important distinction to understand. He was saying that institutions don't actually need someone to be guilty of something to change their strategy and approach. They react to pressure, to exposure, to unpredictability and chaos. When someone becomes a magnet for controversy, even if it's absolutely not their fault at all, the system starts managing around them instead of dealing with the controversy directly. Inside the palace, the people working there get this and understand it. Tom Bower explained how they assess and evaluate not just individual isolated events, but the overall trajectory and pattern over time. One single incident can be explained away easily. But constant chaos and repeated problems, that's a completely different story. And when that chaos becomes linked and connected to a specific person, the response shifts from trying to engage with them to creating distance from them. It's not about blame or pointing fingers, it's about recognizing a pattern that keeps repeating. He also tackled and addressed the idea that silence equals weakness. He said that silence is very often actually the strongest move you can make. It cuts off the oxygen from the fire. It avoids getting into legal trouble. It gives things time to fade away and be forgotten. He suggested that the palace wasn't using silence to protect individual people, but to protect the institution itself from getting dragged into a bigger mess and disaster. That explanation totally reframed and changed how people understood a lot of those no-comment moments from the past. People had been seeing them as avoidance or even quiet approval and agreement. Tom Bower said they were neither of those things. They were containment and damage control. A decision not to get involved in a narrative that they couldn't control once they were actually in it. For Prince Harry specifically, this was particularly unsettling and disturbing. Tom Bower pointed out that Harry seemed to be taking the silence really personally and emotionally. Harry assumed that if something really mattered, it would be addressed publicly and out in the open. But that's not how these institutions work and operate. They're built to last way longer than any individual person. And in those systems, silence often means that engaging would actually do more harm than good. Tom Bower's comments didn't settle anything or resolve any debates. What they did was shift the entire debate and conversation. People stopped arguing about whether specific accusations were actually true or false. Instead, they started focusing on the institution's behavior and actions. Why the palace chose distance over engagement. Why advisors cut off access to certain people. Why lines of communication went cold without any explanation given. You can't really disprove those questions or make them go away. All you can do is observe what's happening and draw your own conclusions. And that's exactly why Tom Bower's intervention mattered so much. He wasn't validating rumors or saying they were true. He was validating skepticism about the silence. He was explaining how power responds to disruption, especially when that disruption keeps happening over and over. He gave people a framework to understand the palace's behavior and actions. And that framework didn't accuse anyone of anything specific. It just challenged assumptions that people had been making. The reaction was immediate, but it was also really muted and quiet. The palace didn't respond at all. They never do respond to this kind of contextual analysis. To respond would be to give it more weight and importance. For Meghan and Harry, the effect was more subtle and less obvious. Tom Bower didn't attack them directly, but he undercut their main defense, which was basically, we're being unfairly targeted and picked on. By the end of this chapter, one thing was completely obvious. Tom Bower hadn't broken his silence to reveal some big secret or bombshell. He broke it to explain why secrets aren't even necessary in this situation. Institutions show you what they care about by what they choose to address and what they choose to ignore. Once you see that pattern clearly, the speculation doesn't need confirmation to keep going and spreading. That reframing didn't end the conversation. Not by a long shot. Tom Bower's decision to speak didn't trigger any immediate consequences or reactions. There were no statements from the palace, no legal threats, no formal denials issued. On the surface, nothing changed at all. But that lack of reaction was totally calculated and intentional. It followed the palace's playbook perfectly. Inside Buckingham Palace, Tom Bower's comments weren't seen as a major event or crisis. They were seen as just commentary and analysis. And commentary, even when it's uncomfortable and challenging, doesn't require a response unless it throws out brand new facts or creates legal risk. Tom Bower hadn't done either of those things. He'd explained behavior, not alleged any specific wrongdoing. From the palace's perspective and viewpoint, the best move was to stay completely silent. Engaging with his comments would only amplify his message and give it more reach. Ignoring it allowed the analysis to just fade away naturally without becoming a full-blown confrontation or fight. The institution knows and understands that authors get their power from the reaction they provoke. If you don't react at all, their words circulate for a little bit and then disappear into nothing. So, outwardly and on the surface, nothing happened at all. But internally and behind the scenes, Tom Bower's words definitely had an impact and effect. According to people in the know, his explanation clarified something that palace advisors had been struggling to articulate publicly for a long time. That distance, not denial, had become their go-to response to recurring controversy and problems. Tom Bower didn't invent that strategy out of thin air. He just named it and identified it clearly. And once it was named, it became visible to everyone who had been misreading the silence as confusion or fear. For Meghan Markle, that visibility was a serious problem. Tom Bower's framing wasn't accusing her of causing scandals directly, but it did suggest that her being around these repeated institutional stress points had changed how the palace behaved around her. That implication is really hard to argue against because it's not about what she intended to do or what her motivations were. It's about the pattern that emerged. And once people see a pattern clearly, it's really hard to make them unsee it or forget about it. For Prince Harry, the impact was even more personal and emotional. Tom Bower's comments challenged a core belief that Harry had held for many years. That silence meant they didn't care about him. Tom Bower explained that silence often means the complete opposite. It means they've assessed the situation carefully and decided that getting involved would make things worse, not better. That changed how Harry understood all those previous no-comment moments from years past. It probably didn't lead to some big public outburst or explosion, but it definitely changed his perspective and how he saw things. According to people close to Harry, Tom Bower's explanation reinforced this growing feeling that institutions don't communicate through reassurance or comfort. They communicate through behavior and actions. Distance, reduced access, procedural roadblocks, those are all signals and messages, even when they don't say a single word out loud. Hollywood and the media world took Tom Bower's remarks in a different way entirely. Producers and commentators didn't see them as some huge revelation or shocking news. They saw them as confirmation of what they already suspected all along. That royal silence wasn't indecision or confusion. It was a deliberate strategy, and strategies tend to stick around once they're adopted and working. That recognition led to a recalibration and adjustment. Not cancellations or denunciations, but caution and hesitation. When an institution starts creating distance from someone, other institutions notice that behavior. They don't rush to contradict it or go against it. They wait to see if it becomes the new normal way of doing things. Tom Bower's words changed the frame without changing the actual facts. Before, speculation was just dismissed as rumor and gossip. After, it was contextualized as a reaction to institutional behavior and patterns. That shift doesn't require everyone to agree with it to be effective and powerful. It just changes how people interpret future silence and non-responses. That's why his intervention mattered so much. He didn't settle any debates or prove anything definitively. He didn't validate any accusations or say they were true. He just explained why the system behaved the way it did, and why that behavior shouldn't be mistaken for randomness or accidents. In doing so, he made the silence make sense and have meaning. The palace kept their distance from Harry and Meghan. That distance now looked intentional, not evasive or uncertain. Meghan and Harry continued on without any public response to Tom Bower. That absence now carried a different meaning and interpretation. The conversation didn't end because Tom Bower spoke up. It just changed shape and form. Instead of asking what was actually true, people started asking why the institutions responded the way they did. That question is harder to dismiss because it doesn't demand proof or evidence. It demands interpretation and analysis. As this chapter closes, the outcome is clear and obvious. Tom Bower didn't expose secrets or hidden information. He exposed process and how the system works. And in systems built on process and procedure, that can be just as disruptive and damaging. His words didn't change any policies or protocols officially, but they changed how silence was understood and interpreted. Once silence is seen as a deliberate strategy, it loses its neutrality and innocence. And when neutrality is gone and lost, distance can become permanent and lasting.